Hey everyone, Cheryl here from the Sewing Basket in Plymouth, Wisconsin, and I'm going to show you a fun little tutorial on how to modify a pattern to be something a little different. So we're going to be starting today's demonstration with this little gnome pattern that we have, and you can find this pattern. It's a free printable download on our studio-wide playground. And it is a pattern that was brought to us from the Country Caboodle. Let me make sure I get it right. Country Caboodle gave permission to American quilt retailers for us to put this on our website for you to enjoy. Now, this was a little summer gnome. He has his little pineapple hat. He's cute and adorable, but for the holidays, I wanted more of a Santa Claus look to my gnome. So I'm going to take my pattern and I'm going to show you how I modified the parts of this gnome to make him look more like our Santa Claus gnomes. So you can see here that what I wanted to change was my hat and my shoes. The other parts of his body I kept pretty much the same, and then I played around with some dimensional changing his beard up to give it a little more fun. But we're going to start with how I redrew the parts of his pattern. So when you have your pattern, he had a little rounded hat and then these little pineapple leaves, and his shoes looked more like these little kind of elf shoes with the pointed toes and the little flower at the top. So the first thing I wanted to do was change the hat. So gnomes usually, a lot of them have the little tall hats, or they have the little hats that curve over and kind of flop over. So how am I going to take my gnome pattern and create this? I'm going to put my pattern on top of a little block because I'm going to be working with a Sharpie pen and I don't want it to bleed through onto my table. A lot of you received these little cutting boards from us 2 years ago for our Santa's workshop. So if you still have it, pull it out. It's a great use for this type of project. And I'm going to be working with some magic markers just so you can see a little better what we're doing with our pattern. So the first thing I wanted to do in order to get my tall pointy hat for my gnome, using my pattern that I printed out. So the first thing I need to do is trace the dotted line, and that's the underlap of where the brim of the hat is going to go later. So I need to do that. And then I traced the edges of my hat all the way up to where it met the little pineapple leaves. All right, so I'm going to stop right there. Now I'm going to use the top leaf for the top of my pointy hat. So I'm going to start here and I'm just going to go down and kind of curve and connect to where I left off my first line. Then I'm going to come back to my point, follow that and curve and leave off. So now there is my little pointy hat. You can make this, add a few more curves in there if you want to. You can play around with that, but you're just using some of the basic lines on this hat to create a new look. When I wanted to do my little curved over floppy hat, I'll just grab this one, a little easier to see. I chose to use some of the leaves on the side. And I'm going to switch to a different color so it might be a little easier for you to see. So again, I would trace that bottom underlap and then traced around the sides of my hat, stopping here. But this time, instead of going up to the top point, I'm going to come around to here, stop where that leaf is, and now I need to connect from here over to here. So I'm just going to draw and just kind of keep going until I get to where my hat stopped there. Okay, and again, you can play with this. I can make it a little more rounded. I could make it a little bigger, a little longer. You can play with that. It's just giving you a basic area to follow. For any of you that are like me that have not a artistic bone in your body, it's a really great way to use somebody else's design and modify it for your needs, for your project. Now to go on to the different changes that I did with the boots. You can see I had, for my first little elf, I just decided to keep him the same way. He was an elf, so I felt that the little pointy shoes with the little flowery tops were fine. When I did my more Santa Claus, I wanted him to have a boot, not a little elf shoe. So I needed to modify it that way. And then my other little girl elf, I wanted a little more of a pointy shoe, not quite so curled up high, but a little flatter and pointier. So to do the Santa boot, again, his boot needs to come further up his leg. So I'm just gonna pick a spot and I'm gonna draw straight across the leg. And I want to extend it a little bit beyond the line of the leg, so his boot's a little bit wider than his leg. And then I'm gonna go down and match that up to where I hit the shoe. And now I'm gonna follow around the heel. I wanted to flatten it out, so I just go across. I didn't keep the boot part, the heel part. You could, if you wanted him to have more of a heel on his boot or more of a cowboy shoe look to it, you could keep the heel. And then I'm gonna start here, I'm gonna curve it up. And now as I go around, I just wanna make that toe, and I'm just gonna curve it off and meet back up. Okay, so I'm just cutting off this top curve of the shoe and creating more of that toe boot look to it. All right, again, if I wanted to keep the heel on the boot, I could still keep that little indent in there and give him a heel. For the little girl elf over here, I just wanted it to be, this curl to come not so high. I wanted it to be a little more pointy of a shoe. Again, so for this one, I don't need to come up any higher. I still kept my little flower top to it. So I'm gonna trace that same curve. I'm gonna go around, I'm gonna keep the little heel. Okay, but now for this one, I'm gonna come around and I'm gonna decide about how high I wanna bring up that toe. Maybe to there. And then from this point, I'm just gonna curve down and bring it back up to meet it at kind of where the ankle is, okay? If I wanted it to be a little more curvy, I could have come up a little bit higher and then curved it down a little more. So again, you can play with how high you want that curve to come up, but it's just kind of cutting off that real steep curve to the shoe. Then the next thing is I need to cut, especially with the shoes, I need to have a left and a right. Now for me to be able to take this pattern, draw this shoe, and then try to create and make it exactly the same on this side, that would be difficult for me. But if you only do it on one side, and then well, this is backwards. When I trace it, if I make sure I have a piece of my fusible web that's gonna be twice as long, I'm then gonna iron this onto my fabric. And now when I can fold it in half, and when I cut it out, I'm gonna have one that's facing left and one that's facing right. Okay, so you only need to draw it once, just make sure that you have enough of your fusible web with your fabric that you can fold in half and cut out two at the same time. Okay, so that's how I modified my pattern to get the different parts that I was looking for my little Santa or my elves. Next, we're gonna go on to the beards. I wanted to play with some dimension for my different beards. And so I played with our Dresden plate. I played with making little curly cues out of batting. And this is just a fun little treatment on tracing a child's hand. So we're gonna start with the Dresden plate. So we have the Dresden plate ruler. And it's the same thing that I used for the sample behind me here. So typically, the full length of the ruler, you're going to get these big long Dresden plates. You can make half Dresdens, you can make quarter Dresdens. I use the same method, but I'm doing it for my beard. So what I needed to do is I wanted different lengths to my beard. So I started out by using my ruler. I cut one piece that was at 2.5 inches. So I used that 2.5 inch mark on my ruler. I had to cut two of them at the 2-inch mark. And then I cut two of them at the 1.5 inch mark. So I have one center one that was 2.5. The next ones were 2. Whoops. You sew them together, and then my 1s, or my 1.5. Okay, so that's going to create my beard. To take these little pieces and make the point, what you're going to do is after you have it cut out, you're going to fold it in half. Right sides together, and you're going to sew that 1/4 inch seam along that bottom edge, which would give you this. Okay, so there's a seam right here, and then I'm just going to take and I'm going to turn that right side out. Okay, It's real helpful if you have a turning tool that you can get in there. This one has a nice blunt edge, so I'm not going to poke through. I'm not going to punch through the bottom of that little point, but I can get it really pointed out real nice and sharp. Okay, so once I have all my pieces sewn and turned right side out, then I'm just going to sew them together, and I will create this little beard. When I iron them, I always want to iron towards the middle so that my edges are turned. If I would iron it this way, that raw edge is going to peek out. So I want to iron towards the middle. Then the last thing I need to do is I need to finish these edges. Okay, I don't want those raw. I'm going to show you two different ways that make it a little easier to finish them. One is using the fabric folding pen. So this is a pen that you fill it up with water. It comes with a little solution. You add 5-6 drops of that solution. It's kind of a conditioner that's going to relax the fabric. So to use the pen, I'm going to take, and I'm just going to fold him over just a second. And on the back side of my fabric, I'm going to put that 1/4 inch line right along the edge of my Dresden plate. You squeeze it just a little bit to get that felt tip wet. And then I'm going to run it right along the edge of my ruler. And what it's doing is it's softening those fibers right where I ran that. And then when I fold it, it'll just fold easier right on that edge. And I got my little iron down here. I can just iron it. And it's just going to give me that nice finished edge there. Okay. The other tool you can use is called a Hera marker. And this one, it's kind of a real sharp beveled edge. So again, if I put that ruler on there, I line up that 1/4 inch mark. And if I just take this and rub it, it's kind of giving that fabric a good crease. So it'll fold right there in that memory of that fabric. And again, it's going to fold real nice where I rubbed it. And then I can take my iron and press it. And so now I have my finished edges to my beard. To put my beard into my Santa, and I have this is a little guy I mocked up. He's got all of his parts and pieces except for his beard, so I can stick different beards under there for the demo. And you can see here on this Santa, I kept the heel of the boot to give me just that little more chunky look to his feet. So once I have my Dresden plate done, I would put him underneath the hat. I can adjust it up and down, and it's okay if a little bit of that unfinished edge is still peeking out, because eventually I'm going to put a nose over it anyway, so you would be covering that up. So if you want to pull that beard down a little bit, just make sure that it's not down so far that your nose can still cover it, or you could cut your nose a little bit bigger. For the hat on my elves, I use the same circle, and I just cut out different circles to put a little pom-pom onto the hat. I think I got one up here. Okay, so those are the same sizes. So that's how you play with the Dresden ruler to make this little beard. On my Santa, I wanted to play a little bit with these little curls that you can make using batting. They're real fun, add a lot of nice texture. So for this Santa, I started out with batting, and I cut out the background. Let me get my original little gnome here again. So he had fabric, 2 different layers of beard and mustache. So I cut out the bigger one just out of batting. So you would stick that in there. Okay, and you can iron it down if you want, but you want to make sure that you still have room underneath here. Now to make your curly cues, you're just going to cut a circle from batting. It's going to be about the size of a 1/4, maybe a little bit bigger. And then you're just going to continue cutting it in a circle. So I'm going to start at the edge. And I want it to be maybe about a 1/4 inch, maybe a little less thick, my strip that I'm cutting. And you don't have to be real crazy or precise. They're meant to be curly cues. And I'm just going to keep cutting in a circle. Okay. These little scissors work really great because they have a really nice sharp point. They have serrated edges, so they really grasp the batting or the fabric nice, especially for getting into real sharp points. And I'm gonna go around almost to the end. okay? It was really great. These scissors were really great for cutting out all these little points and indents in this beard also. So once I get my circles cut, I have this, and now when you stretch them out, they're just gonna curl up, and you can kind of play and twist and stretch them. So here's a couple other ones that I have, right? And then what you're gonna do, now when you iron, before I put my little mustache curls in there, I wanna iron this part of the beard down so that's stable. One thing when you're working with the batting is it's harder to get that heat to transfer through the batting to melt the glue on the back from your fusible web. So I like to iron it from the back. So I'm going to position it. I'm going to put a pin in there so I can flip it over, iron it from the back so that it stays a little more in place, because the heat can transfer through the thin cotton easier than through the nap of the batting. Okay, you want to make sure to use iron resistant pins. Some of you have glass head pins. This is a new pin that we just got called Cool Pins. They have a little silicone base on them, so they're heat resistant. You won't have to worry about anything melting. They're a little grippier. They aren't as slippery as the glass head pins because they're silicone, so they got a little tack to them. And also because the head is bigger and brightly colored, if you drop them on your floor, they're a little easier to find. They got a real nice long thin shaft to them. So those are the Cool Pins that we've just gotten in. So you do want to pin that down, flip it over, and get that under beard tack down. Then you're going to start, and you can cut all different circles out. And you can have skinny ones and fat ones. And, you know, if you got one and you don't like it, well, throw it away. You're working with batting that is your scrap anyway. And then to hold it in place, I'm going to take my Roxanne glue, and I'm just going to put a little dot of the glue on the end of my little beard piece, and I'm going to stick it in there, okay? And you can kind of play around. I tried to avoid putting it right in the center, so when I put that nose on there, I'm not trying to get that nose to stick over a bunch of humpy bumpy of the mustache curls, okay? But you can just play around with adding in as many or as few as you want. And now I'm gonna put my hat brim on and fuse that whole thing in place, and that will hold all those little curly cues down. Now again, you're working with some different levels and some texture, so you want to press and heat that up really well, and then as soon as you take your iron off, you're going to want to have a clapper, and that's going to help hold that down. So while this is still hot, as soon as you take your iron off, you're going to put that clapper on there, and you're going to press down and hold it there for maybe 30 seconds while that cools down. And then when you pick it up, it's really going to help this fusible web stick down nice and tight over the different heights and weight of these curls that are on there. Okay, so that's how we did the second beard for our Santa Claus. Now the other thing on this Santa Claus, I didn't have to do anything with his hat. These guys, I made a little difference. If you look at my little pineapple gnome, this hat was the exact same hat that he used. We just didn't put the leaves on. And then again, I copied his nose to make his little pom-pom. So the only thing I changed on him was his boots, and I added his curls. And then the last one that we have is going to be our little handprint. So we brought, I had one of our staff members bring in her little girl, and we traced her hand. So these are, let me grab them here. These are Lillian's little handprints that we traced, a left and a right, okay? So you can just copy, trace them. Remember that whichever way you trace it, it's gonna go the other way. So if there's one hand you like better, you might wanna think about that. Now when we traced them, let me get my little sample guy. I'm gonna move this over a little bit so I can put my gnome here. Take these out, okay. When I traced it just the size of her hand, because of the size of our gnome that we have here, it got a little bit long, okay? So his beard was going all the way down to his boots, which was a little longer than I wanted. So what we did was, let me find my sample. You see, I took, and if I match these up, see how I cut off a portion of the hand, and I also shortened up the fingers just a little bit, just to make the proportion of my beard fit with my body gnome a little bit better. Depending upon what pattern you're using, you may not need to do that, okay? Or the age of your child. If you have Lillian is about 2.5. If you have a smaller child, it might be the right proportion. So again, once I'm done with that, I can stick this in there. I can iron that down. If I want to add the second little mustache to it, just out of a fabric, I could do that. Again, I'm going to iron these down. I'm going to use my clapper to hold that in place as it cools, because again, with that thickness of that batting, it can be a little bit harder to get everything to stick. So you're going to hold that clapper down while it cools, and then you can add your little nose on. Okay. One other thing is, if I don't want it to, this guy is stuck down hard, all my fingers. But if I would like it to be that my beard is a little floppy, well, I want to have a finished side on the back side. Okay, so you can see here I still have my paper with, and so when I peel this paper off, I'm going to have my glue from my heat and bond on there. So what I did with that is I had 2 different hands, and I need to have, you know, the reverse so that one is left, one is right, but you can't just trace the left and the right because they're going to be different. So what I did was I traced one hand with a Sharpie off of my original. So I just traced this hand again. And now when you flip it over, because you use that Sharpie, it bleeds through enough that you can see it again. So I traced one hand on this side and traced the other hand on this side. So that gave me 2 of the same hand, but mirror images. And then I'm going to cut out a little piece here. So that would be my opening on the back. And then on this hand, what I'm going to do is I'm only going to peel up my fingers. Okay, lost my scissors. And then I'm going to cut those off. Just the paper part of that. Or rip them off. And the thumb. Okay, but I want to leave that little paper part on there. And this part, I had this cut off. So now I can put these 2 hands, right sides together, iron them so that they stay, but I still have this paper here, so when I iron it, it doesn't get on my iron. Okay, I might need to do a little extra trimming just because they got cut a little different to make all my fingers match up. But now these 2 are ironed together. When I peel off this part of the paper, I can now stick it underneath there, right? Iron that down, and now I'm going to have a 2-sided beard. So the only part that'll be glued down is going to be up here, and I'm going to have a little floppy beard with it. So those are just some of the things that we did to make our gnome look a little bit different, a little more festive for the holidays. On this gnome too, what I did was for the pom-pom on the hat, I just took the fabric that had little circles on it. So I put a piece of heat and bond on the back of my fabric and just cut around one of those exact circles to give me that little pom-pom. All right, so I hope that this is something that maybe some of you will play with. If you do work with it, please post it on our network so that everybody can see and share what everyone's doing. And I hope you have a great holiday and have some fun playing with your Santa and Elf gnomes. Thanks a lot. Bye.